Hey everyone, I'm Phil McAuliffe and I'm the Lonely Diplomat, and I want to say hi and welcome to you for joining me here on YouTube for episode 30 of the Lonely Diplomat podcast. And this is about lessons from 2020. So we're quickly, perhaps not quick enough, coming to the end of 2020, and what a year, etc., etc., etc. It's just been crap, hasn't it? Or has it? This is going to be an episode that I'll be recording on this microphone here. I really do need to get a proper cover. But for some reason in New Zealand, they seem to have sold out of all these covers. Perhaps everybody has spent 2020 podcasting. Who knows? Anyway, this does the trick. So why don't you get yourself comfortable and yeah, wherever you are living your diplomatic life right now, I hope that you and yours are doing well and that you are being kind to yourself. All right. Shall we get cracking? Let's do it. All right. Just going to get ready. A quick sip of tea to all right, get things going, calm the nerves. I don't know, whatever it is. Quench your thirst. All right, 2 seconds. All right. Oops. All right. Let's do it. Hello, you've landed. Okay, take 2. Hello, you've landed on the Lonely Diplomat podcast, and wherever you are in the world, from Warsaw, Washington DC, Wellington, and Windhoek, and all places in between, welcome. I'm Phil McAuliffe, I'm the Lonely Diplomat, and you are listening to episode 30 of the Lonely Diplomat podcast, and it's a pleasure to be in your speakers or on your screen if you're watching it through YouTube, wherever you are in the world. And wherever you are in the world, I really do hope that you are keeping safe, you are keeping well, and you're ready for a chat about lessons from my 2020, or indeed lessons from 2020. So this episode, I'm going to go through some of the things that have been going on for me, and before opening up and wanting to start a conversation with you, opening up and giving you an invitation, inviting you to reflect on the highs and lows of 2020 so far. Before I get going, I always forget to say this at the beginning. I end up saying this at the end. But a like, a comment, and more importantly, a share really helps those diplomats and those living the diplomatic life know that they're not alone. So, as I said, like, comment, share within your networks really helps diplomats and those living the diplomatic life to know that they're not alone. And I don't know, it seems to be what other podcasters and now YouTubers say, and it really does help appease the social media gods and would help me out enormously. So if you could do that, formally, informally, that would be awesome, and I would really, really appreciate it. So now let's crack into episode 30 of the Lonely Diplomat podcast, Lessons from My 2020. And I have written down some notes, and I'm showing them now, listener. I'm showing them on YouTube, and there's kind of, what started out as nice, orderly thoughts and nice sort of metered dot points has turned into a page that kind of looks like a dog's breakfast, where there's arrows looping back around, and then there's, triple underlines, and I think I've misplaced my highlighter. So, passages that I really want to hit and points that I really want to make are unhighlighted. And I found myself just a few minutes ago sitting down here and was going to reorder my thoughts. And then I caught myself. And one of the things that I've really been reflecting on about 2020 and how I've responded to my 2020, one of the things that I really wanted to do in this episode, always, but especially in this episode, is to be real. I want you to see that it's okay to not have everything sorted at every moment of the day. And because I in taking a step back just a moment, in wanting to recollect my thoughts, I was going into diplomat Phil mode and wanting to, I guess, present within this episode of my podcast, which is designed to help serve and support you, but in this episode of my podcast to come across as well considered, well put together with coherent and logical arguments. And I think, the arguments generally are going to be coherent and logical. And there are going to be points that I will be going through. But I caught myself putting the mask of having all my shit together back on as a way of, I guess, controlling how you see me and how you experience me, my work, and my my considerations. That was not the word that I was looking for there, but how I've interpreted and experienced my 2020. So, having caught myself wanting to present this, highly polished and professional image to you, my awesome listener, wherever you are in the world, you're getting me. And that's my commitment to you, is that you get more me. And I can't encourage you, inspire you, and invite you to be more you, be more awesomely and more humanly you in the world, if I'm not being more awesomely and being more humanly me in the world as well. You'd be right to call bullshit on that. You'd be right to go, yeah, Phil, that's well and good that you're saying that to us, saying that to me, but what about you? How about you let your guard down just a moment? And so here I am, letting my guard down and sharing with you some of the things that have happened in my life over 2020. And thinking back, as I'm sure you are or have done already or will soon do as you set your intentions for 2021, you are casting your mind back to perhaps December 2019, way back to January 2020, which probably does seem, if you're like me, just a few weeks ago, in this very weird and bizarre year that has been 2020. And you probably also like me, went in with all sorts of plans and intentions for 2020, and things were going pretty well there for at least a few weeks. And I was no different. I had all sorts of plans and intentions that I wanted to do, both here in my work at The Lonely Diplomat. I started a website. I launched another website and another blog based on loneliness with a primary focus for gay men called thelonelinessguy.com, and over the year that's morphed into a blog and a podcast as well. So Connection Over Coffee with the Loneliness Guy. And I do, you may have just noticed a bit of a pause there. I do get very confused sometimes within myself between the Loneliness Guy and the Lonely Diplomat. So please forgive me if accidentally I say, instead of the Lonely Diplomat, it's the Loneliness Guy. You haven't changed stations, you haven't suddenly clicked on a podcast, another podcast that has my picture on it. You are listening to the Lonely Diplomat podcast, but that kind of explains why. It's been a year because I'm so driven. I'm so driven, absolutely deeply passionate in a way that I've not felt about anything that I've worked on in my life before, to let people like me know that the horrible thoughts and feelings that they are experiencing within themselves, that potentially empty void, that discomfort, that uncomfortable feeling of general unease and discomfort that they might be feeling within themselves about their life and where they are in life, that may or may not be loneliness. And loneliness in itself, it has such a stigma about it that we often don't want to engage on the thoughts and feelings of loneliness or label them as such until there is no other choice but to engage with them. And I'm feeling so deeply passionate about the work that I am doing that it's almost like it consumes me. It consumes me in a really good way, and I'm so deeply passionate about letting people who can benefit from my life experience and my insight and my wisdom know that they're not alone. That's precisely why I do what I do, and we got into that in episode 29 on my purpose. So I don't really want to rehash episode 29. If you feel that you want to go back and or listen to that, go and listen to episode 29. The invitation's there. But I had those best laid plans and intentions, and by not necessarily by August I would have this, and September I would have that, but I had a very clear direction of where I wanted things to go. And then obviously 2020 happened. And within my own life, big deep breath there. So my former wife and I decided to separate last year, and I moved out of the family home at the end of January 2020, and feeling very grateful that I am an Australian here in New Zealand, and ironically, the conditions on my visa as a regular Australian citizen here in New Zealand is actually better than what I would have as an Australian, as the holder of an Australian passport holder of a diplomatic visa on an Australian passport. So for Australians, essentially, I can stay, I can work, I can do all sorts of things, and without voting here in New Zealand, and no other country affords that to Australian citizens. So for all of the countries and cities in the world for that to happen, New Zealand was perhaps the best, and I had the intention of remaining close to the family home so I could still support my former wife, I don't like calling her my ex-wife because that seems like acrimonious. But former wife is kind of, where I've landed on that. I'm not going to go into the details because you haven't earned the right to hear that story. Only very few, very privileged people have earned the right to hear that story. But I was really committed to wanting to stay very close to the family home so I could be there for our children. I took some leave, some additional leave from my employer back in Canberra, and was able to find what turned out to be a pretty it was a place. It was an apartment. It was like a studio apartment that turned into, whenever it rained, it had its own water feature, courtesy of some burst downpipes that fed through the little courtyard in it. But it was my space. It was dank. It was dark. It was an absolute hovel. It was an absolute hovel, but it was within 10 minutes walk of the family house. It was, in a really nice little part of Wellington. And it just meant that, I could stay close to the kids. And so that's enough right there, isn't it? That's plenty right there. But that separation not only was like the end of a fantastic relationship, but also and moving out of the family home and upsetting both emotionally and physically and mentally our family structure in and of itself was deeply upsetting. And you would know this as a listener of the Lonely Diplomat podcast and a reader of the Lonely Diplomat blog that I wrote a blog and published a blog back in April, May. I want to say that I can remember exact date, but April, May-ish, sometime in that part of the year, where I talked about the end of a relationship and spoke about what happens when a relationship ends while you're on a diplomatic posting. And I spoke to my friend Katja Vlahos, who has worked on divorce and separation in the expat context. And so we had a really great chat on one of the episodes of the Lonely Diplomat podcast. And in writing that, I injected some of my own, very briefly and in a very controlled way, my own experience. But I want to share with you some further thoughts on this now as a reflection of my 2020. And if you've got sensitive ears, either within yourself or there are people with sensitive ears very close by and who can hear, you might just want to press pause and I don't know, go and put them in another room or excuse yourself and keep listening or pop some headphones on or something like that. But while I can... sorry, I was going into diplomatic mode there for a moment. I need to be me. And the way that former significant others are treated by the diplomats employing agencies is horrendous. Full stop. Is horrendous. And it's not the fault, exclusive fault, of the employing agency. I understand, and I'm going back into diplomatic mode. I understand that this is a private consideration for a couple, and that there's public money to be to account for, and there are all sorts of expectations that have to pass. The what's called in Australia the pub test, or the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald, or what passes as publicly acceptable, and agencies need to work within those confines. But when everything feels like it is open to the discretion of individual people, right through to the beyond a very low baseline. The experience is horrendous. And I cannot imagine what it must be like for someone who is not like me and goes through a separation here in New Zealand, where I had a right of stay. Had this applied in any other country, I would have been and not entitled to stay on a diplomatic visa, therefore not entitled to stay in the country unless I found my own visa, and then own accommodation, etc., etc., etc. Had there have been significant language issues, prohibitive costs of rent or whatever, that I would not have seen my kids. And it's important there to recognize that every single person's sort of relationship is different. I get that, I understand that, and I want that to be the general disclaimer that I'm saying all of this under. But something needs to happen. And this is where I'm reflecting, and one of the lessons that I've learned from 2020 is that as a diplomatic community, as employers, as people who live the diplomatic life, as diplomats, we need to be much better at helping and supporting people when they go through a separation, rather than, as an employer, putting your hands up and going, oh, no, this is a private matter. We're just going to stay by the sidelines. That's too convenient. That is too convenient, because everything else in the relationship is tainted by the work. The work is always a third wheel in the relationship, and for when that relationship is going through difficulties, or actually ends, not just difficulties, ends, for the employer to go, oh, sorry, that's a personal matter, not good enough. That's not good enough. That's too convenient. That's too convenient when the employer knows way more about ourselves and our relationships before we go on postings, before there's relationships, whatever it is from a security perspective. It's not good enough. It's not good enough for the employer to vacate the field all of a sudden. And for me, the experience is manageable. Luckily, I'm managing. We are managing, and this is not meant to be a rant against the employer in my own circumstances, not at all. But I can really see, and I'm thinking about this for 2021, how we as a global diplomatic community, as individuals, as employing agencies, all parties begin to have a kind and honest and real conversation about what it means to be in a relationship that ends. That requires the employing agency to rethink how it applies and learn from other agencies about what they do. And it also requires us, individual diplomats, and those who live the diplomatic life, to consider what a separation means for us. Just considering what might happen in a separation doesn't doom a relationship to end. Not at all. However, in the real world, in the ordinary world, 50% of all marriages ending in divorce, not even keeping out the demographics, the challenges, I should say, of this diplomatic life on our relationships. There's work to be done. And I'm working out how I can do that. going forward into 2021. Going forward, I do sound like a public servant there, don't I? Anyway, so while I separated and moved into my my own place, I also, have a new partner. So his name is Jeff, and he's amazing. He's a Kiwi, and you would have seen him on the Lonely Diplomat social media every so often through 2020. He's fantastic, and I can attest to the power of authenticity and the joy that can come when we allow who we are to be. So I have, for all the challenges of 2020, one of the things that's been an absolute eye-opening in a delightful way has been the joy that I can experience in being myself. And that's not to say that this new relationship that I'm in is easy or or anything like that, as we'll get into. But Jeff and I have not really spent any time apart for the last 10 months. And when we were just talking about this the other day, earlier this morning, that it's been 10 months. There's not really been a cross word, like a word spoken in anger or anything like that. And that either means that, we're building up a head full of resentful rage, or we're actually doing really well. And I think we're doing really well. But anyway, it's been, a weird year, because I don't think that, under the normal circumstances, 2020, like we would have been spending so much time together, but that's actually proven to be a real joy, and it's actually a beautiful thing to see my kids and Jeff interact. They gang up on me from time to time. That's okay. Yeah, so that's what's going on. And one of the other things that I wanted to reflect on is what COVID has meant. And isn't it interesting how we can, rather than say COVID or the pandemic or something, it's like, we come up for, like, we generally, not just diplomats and those who live the diplomatic life, let's call it like the current situation or something like that. Isn't that interesting and not ironic, but it's just an interesting observation that I wanted to share with you, that, the pandemic, COVID-19, kind of gets summarized in the general situation. That's sort of political, economic, social, and stuff. But for me, COVID has provided a really terrible, like I wouldn't have thought that this would give it, but a very poignant example of a reminder of what's important, and that it's always about who and what is important, and paying attention, very close attention, to who and what is important to us. No one wanted that. No one wanted a global pandemic that has killed many people and affected countless others, to have that, to give that reason, and perhaps we won't need a terrible, almost life and death reason to be grateful for what we have and who we have in our lives into our collective futures. Anyway, the other thing that I've really been reflecting on, and one of the other lessons that I've learned from my 2020, is the value of friendship, going to who and what is important. And I'm not going to, I'm not going to go diplomatic on this either, but it's not only that, but friendship and belonging. And one of the things that really occurs to me, while I have, an amazing partner in Jeff, and someone who sees me and hears me, and I feel very much like I belong, the wider issue of belonging for me here in Wellington. While Wellington is lovely and it's a home, it's not home. I don't have the deep links that many other people have with others, and the transient nature of my existence here in Wellington, particularly this year when I was meant to return to Australia at the beginning of August, and delayed that because of a worsening COVID situation in Victoria. That I have stayed here and am essentially homeless. I don't have a permanent home right now. Living on very limited means, and am homeless. And that forces oneself to confront many a truth. And hi, my name's Phil. I really struggle, probably just like you, to ask for help. And I will ask for help only when every other opportunity has been exhausted or there really is no other choice. I know that that's something that I need to continue to work on. But when I do ask for help, it takes enormous reserves of courage. And I had to ask for help. And sometimes that's a beautiful thing. It's an opportunity for real connection. And other times it's a very the answer that we're given is very confronting. And that's happened here for me in Wellington. And where I asked for help, and in some cases was given a no, but completely understand it's horrible, it's terrible, etc., etc. But others, essentially met with from friends, the best wishes and what's the thoughts and prayers. Thoughts and prayers are the equivalent of thoughts and prayers. And I'm not going to lie, that's been an extremely frustrating. I've been telling myself many stories about belonging, my worth, and questioning actually the concept of friendship. And I'm going to be doing a bit more of reflecting on that, but I'm reminded of the work that I did back in 2019 on the concept of home, again with Katja Vlahos, about how we diplomats and those living the diplomatic life can feel at home in so many different places in the world, but not feel at home anywhere. And not only that, but have so many friends in different parts of the world, but when we need them, they're not actually really there physically with us. And that's really hard. That's a really hard lesson to keep learning. It's a very tough reminder. And the work that I do is all about connection. The work that I do both in The Lonely Diplomat and The Loneliness Guy is all about connection. And one of the things that one of the absolute fundamentals of connection is being connected to yourself. And if you don't belong anywhere, you can belong to yourself. And I've been binging on the content of Dr. Maya Angelou lately, and she says that when you belong nowhere, you belong everywhere. No place. I've messed up the quote, but it's all about you can belong everywhere but nowhere, and the price is high, but the reward is great. Oh, I really wish that I hadn't mungled that up, but it's a beautiful beautiful quote that I found great power in. So I've spent some time actually away from the Lonely Diplomat podcast and reflecting and coming back to belonging to me. And this is a very powerful lesson that 2020, some events in 2020 have taught me, that I can belong every place, no place at all, but I belong more to me. And the reward is high, the price is high, but the reward is great. So that's one of the very key learnings that I've had for 2020. And indeed, while Wellington does feel like home and how it's not home, in a few weeks' time, in January, I'll be returning to Canberra, which is home, but it's not home. The intention is to stay in Canberra for a few years and put down some more permanent roots perhaps. But I wonder if that's been something that you've appreciated too. Have you had need for friends but realised that you have friends who want to see you, who are there for the good times, but when you need help, you've found that friends are, that there are true friends who are right there with you when you do need help. Has that been something that you can appreciate from your 2020? So, just looking here at my notes, one of the things that I wanted to really say just about from that example. So some of the feelings that I've had in me have been anger. I've been very angry at 2020. I've been angry at, the things that are far outside of my control. Angry. Really angry, deep, frustrated. I think you get my point that I've been really angry. And it's interesting. I was speaking to someone just a few weeks ago and they're like, that's going to make you angry. How do you express anger? And that sent me on some reflection. And I want to ask you this based on that reflection, listener and viewer. When you feel angry, and you're a diplomat or someone who lives the diplomatic life, do you allow yourself to express that anger? Or do you, and I don't mean like expressing anger as like, going and punching a hole in the wall or something like that, or smashing things up, not like, Hulk smash kind of business, none of that, but, letting someone know that you're angry, actually saying, I am angry with you. Can you say that? Like not being physically violent, not being emotionally or any kind of abusive, but owning your emotions and putting a label on your emotions, like saying and allowing yourself to feel the perfectly natural human emotion of anger. Do you allow yourself to do that? Or do you do what I tend to do? And that is to get angry and then go to express it, but then pause either for a few moments or like milliseconds or for a few days or whatever, but a period of time. And then go, you know what? No, I am just going to not let someone know that they've made me angry and then move on. But I'm going to potentially, it feels like for me sometimes, suppress that anger, and because I don't want, and here's the kicker, I don't want my response of anger to become the issue that's being talked about. And from my experience in diplomacy, from my experience in working in government for 20 years, that we desperately that we don't desperately, let's forget that I said desperately, we just don't want our response to the issue to become the issue that everyone that then responds on. So that comes at a cost though. If we're not expressing, if we're not allowing ourselves to feel emotions, to feel those bad, those uncomfortable, those inconvenient emotions that make others potentially feel uncomfortable, we pay the price within ourselves. So if we're angry, we're allowed to be angry. If I'm angry, I'm allowed to be angry. I'm allowed to feel it. I'm allowed to express it. But yet I don't. I seem to very quickly process it in inverted commas, and channel it into something that is, I feel, going to be productive. Is that expressing my anger? Don't know. But it seems as though I sort of go into potentially diplo mode and look to sort of work through the issue while denying my own internal emotional response. That's fine in, around a conference room, in, multilateral discussions, but that denies a human emotion. It denies a human experience, and those denials come at an emotional, certainly an emotional cost, a mental cost, and a physical cost. So can you express anger at the appropriate time to the appropriate person or at the circumstance? Or do you quickly go to do something, to fix it or to move the situation along? Now, that's actually psychological resilience. And one of the key themes of my work here at The Lonely Diplomat is on resilience. And indeed, diplomats, we are resilient. We are, meant to be resilient. We're meant to roll with the punches. We're meant to surge and then spring back to form. And this has been, the topic of much of my work over the last 2 years. But do we have to be resilient all the time? Do we have to be resilient all the time? Can we, 2020 has thrown, for me, as I've just shared, personally, at a micro level, but then at a global macro level, it's thrown a lot of shit at us, hasn't it? And if we're constantly just going, oh, okay, what do we do next? And then what do we do next? And what do we do next? I promise you, listener, I promise you, Phil, speaking to myself, and I promise you, viewer, that comes at a cost. That comes at a cost, whether we want it to or not. And that those unfelt emotions, good, bad, whatever, an emotion is coming out somewhere else in our lives. So we might be feeling frustrated with work, and so we take it out on ourselves, or we take it out on people closest to us and with whom we can feel safe. It's a lot in there just from a reflection of how I process anger. And I just wanted to share that with you because I want to know how you are processing anger and frustration and resentment and disappointment and all of the other kind of non-diplomatic responses, where diplomatic is calm and measured and considered, and given once we've gotten control over our emotions again. That denies, it has a place, as I've said, but it denies the human experience of human emotions, and that comes at that cost, or as that comes at a cost, as I have just said. Anyway, so when all that is done, reflecting on our response, our internal response to the various punches, the plot twists, the false starts, all that kind of stuff that 2020 has thrown our way, both at a macro level and at a micro level, wherever you are in the world, be it through elections or lockdowns, or having to go into isolation after returning home for 2 weeks, and feeling like you're a pawn in great global plays. How have you been feeling your 2020? What are the lessons that you've learned physically, mentally, and emotionally from your 2020? And for me, I still find great power in classical Stoic thought. I can't control, and I share this with you now because I wonder if you can get some value out of this too. But I can't control what happens or how it happens, or anything like that. And hi, I'm Phil. I like to be in control of everything, but I can't control things that are outside of my control. The only thing that I can ever do is control my words, my thoughts, and my actions in response. So I continue to choose to be curious. I continue to choose to be courageous. I continue to choose to care. I continue to choose to be committed, to be connected. So I'm no longer the lonely diplomat. I choose to step up and help and collaborate and find a workable way forward for myself and for you. So for me, that's where the great power lies, knowing that I always have a choice in how I respond. And listener, viewer, you always have a choice in how you respond. So 2020 might feel like it happened to you, but perhaps, if not now, but sometime soon, you can reflect that 2020 happened for you. And there's great power in that mere change of a preposition. All right, so I'd love to hear what your lessons are. If you're up to it, please feel free to send me an email to admin@thelonelydiplomat.com. Or if you want, you can reach out on social media. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, so you can send a message, you can send me a DM, you can send me a message on LinkedIn, here on YouTube as well. I don't know, just look me up and send me your thoughts. As I said, in episode 29, I'm moving the Lonely Diplomat podcast into a more conversational tone, based on a particular topic. So if you've got a question for me, let me know. Please know that discretion is assured. It's the issue that I want to talk about, not who you are, where you are, what you do, or who you do it for, or for whom you do it, speaking properly. But it's the issue, because we who live the diplomatic life are our best source of support, and helping each other, using the Lonely Diplomat podcast as a vessel to have those kind and honest conversations for the global diplomatic community is the way that I can serve you. I can also serve you if you want me in your corner, and you feel that you could do with some of my wisdom, my insight, my experience, my suggestions for you. You want me to listen to your experience. You can become a minister member and have a mentoring call with me every quarter, so that's every 3 months, or you can become an ambassador level member of my site, and have a chat and we'll have a chat every month about what's going on for you and your diplomatic life. So if you want me in your corner, I'm here. I'm committed to challenging, serving, supporting, and inspiring you as you lead your diplomatic life. Okay, until next time, that's about it from me. And fire your questions in, and I'll speak to you next week. So until then, be awesomely and humanly you, because the world really does need more you. Okay. That was it. I hope you got some good value from that, and there was something in that for you. But no. So thank you so much for joining me. Thanks so much for watching the video to this point. And I hope to see you next week on the next episode of the Lonely Diplomat podcast. I'll see you later.